everybody. Welcome to the panel discussion, Artist, Mother, Mother, Artist. This panel seeks to provide a venue for a diverse group of mothers to discuss the professional and artistic reality of being a mother and a ceramic artist. So 30 years after the Guerrilla Girls, women continue to face inequities in the art world. Women earn more than half the MFAs granted in the US, but hold only 37% of tenured positions, with minority women holding under 5% of tenure-track positions. In 2014, Art Forum reported that 4,000 of the 4,000 artists represented in LA and New York, only 32% were women. So the difficulty of establishing or maintaining a career while also raising children is central to these issues of gender inequality in the art world. Women continue to spend on average twice as long as men physically caring for children under 6. In 2014, among tenure-track art faculty, only 44% of women were married with children compared to 70% of men. So this panel really came about to present a forum to discuss these issues and also hopefully provide some solutions that each of the panelists found to deal with these things. It's also my hope that we can develop community through this panel and another amazing panel tomorrow, which we're totally going to plug, and develop some advocacy so that we can provide better structures to support women and women who have children. Women in ceramics are not immune to the social, cultural challenges of being an artist and a mother. This is particularly the case since talking about motherhood specifically has been stigmatized in the art world. Many women in the field of art find that motherhood has been predefined as an all or nothing. You're either an artist or a mother. Yay, first slide transition, great. Okay, so the panelists will discuss their lived experiences in relation to questions posed by myself and all of you. We will talk about topics including the intersection of motherhood, artistic career, and studio practice, the impact of social norms, family structure, race, ethnicity, and economics, life balance, family leave, and childcare, residencies, and other opportunities that are available. So the panelists include, and starting from right here, Teruko Nomura is an Asian-American Austin-based artist with a multimedia practice. She has a BFA from San Francisco Art Institute and an MFA from UT Austin. Her work explores cultural and feminine identity, ritual, and repetition through multiples. She recently completed her first public art project funded by Art Place America. Next to her is Jeannine Hill. Janine was born in Accolade, New Mexico on a Pueblo reservation where she and her family were surrounded by the vast orchards and high canyon walls. She was taught the value of storytelling by her mother, who used words to shape the world. She began telling stories with her hands early on and continued to pursue this practice while pursuing a BFA in ceramics at Virginia Commonwealth University and an MFA in ceramics at the University of Delaware. Iva Quang was born in Hong Kong and received her BFA from the Rhode Island School of Design and her MFA from the Tyler School of Art. She has lectured extensively around the country and abroad. Her compelling, colorful, and biomorphic sculptures, vessels, drawings, and installations have exhibited all around the US, Asia, and Europe. She's a recipient of grants ranging from the National Endowment of the Arts, Ohio Arts Council, and the Mid-Atlantic Arts Consortium. And this is awkward. My name is Sarah Parent Ramos. My work stems from my international background and my experience in the field of psychology. I received a BA from Swarthmore College and an MFA from New York State College of Ceramics at Alfred University. I currently teach in San Diego, California. So just to give you an outline of how today's gonna go, so you know, well, hopefully you won't want to escape, but if you want to. The panel will go as follows. We'll have a 5-minute introduction to the panel topics and panelists, which we did. 35 minutes of presentations from each of the panelists, kind of describing their own work and how that intersects with the experience of motherhood. 15-minute roundtable discussion. I have some presented pre-formulated questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. And a 5-minute conclusion where we're hopefully, we'll tell you about some resources that are out there and point you in some directions. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first panelist, Chiruko Nomura.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you all of you for being here. Oh my goodness, this is a big crowd. I am Chiruko Nomura, and I'm an artist based in Austin, Texas. Yay, Austin! It's much different weather right now. I work in a lot of different materials, actually, but the three that kind of come up a lot are ceramics, paper, and fabric. Those are my kind of main ones that I go to. I do 2D and 3D as well. As Sarah mentioned, I'm interested in ritual, multiples, collective memory, Asian American identity, and indigenous and Asian traditions. Yay. Uh-oh. That's okay. I'm also a mom, and I'm a mom of a 16-month-old. You'll see a picture of her in a little bit. I'm also a mom-to-be. I have one in utero right now. Thank you. So 2 at once. And if I'm a little out of breath, that is why. We'll crowd it in there already. I'm lucky enough to have an amazingly supportive partner who has allowed me, as we kind of decided together, to have a really low sort of bill structure, and we've done a lot of savings over the years. So as we started to make the decision to start having a family, we were able to, he actually just recently quit his day job as well. He's a musician. And so we're both kind of focusing on our creative careers as well as being parents. And I think for us, we don't know how sustainable this is for very long, but we're giving ourselves a couple of years to like really enjoy this opportunity to be with these little ones at this age. So that's kind of how we're managing the financial economic situation. We're lucky enough that he makes a bit of money with his music, and I kind of supplement with workshops and grants and things like that. So low mortgage is awesome. So today with my presentation, I'm just going to start quickly with a little bit of background of the inspiration of my work, and then I'll talk to you about 3 projects that I've done recently since my journey of motherhood has begun. So I'm half Japanese American and half Filipino American, and being Filipino was not as big a part of my growing up because my mother was sort of more encouraged to assimilate into the white mainstream. So, but my father, because I think of his experience during World War II, his family was incarcerated in the internment camps, which is a big buzz topic right now, I feel like, in our current political climate. And so that he was really wanted us to celebrate and acknowledge our Japanese heritage. So that's really filtered through my work a lot. You'll see a lot of that and where it comes from. So, let's see. When I was 4 years old, I went to Japan and I visited the Hiroshima Peace Park. My family is actually also from Hiroshima, so when the bomb was dropped, it was kind of double tragedy. And so we went to visit it when I was 4 years old, and this is when I learned about the story of Sadako and the 1,000 Paper Cranes, which is, if you're not familiar with the story, it's a story of a little girl who survived the bomb, but because of radiation got leukemia. And in Japan, there's a legend of if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you'll be granted a wish. So her wish was to live. She didn't make it. Her community finished that for her. And then they erected this memorial for her in the middle of the Peace Park. And every year, children from all over send cranes as a kind of continuous memorial and remembrance of peace. So that story as a little girl really affected me, and I started learning origami that year. My father passed away 2 years later, and as a kind of effort or a way of connecting back with him, my mother brought us to these Japanese festivals that were like a festival of the dead. So we would dance and we would remember our ancestors, and these are just pictures of like a kind of typical Obon festival. Here's my picture of my baby. But I just thought I would add that a little bit in there, sorry. So fast forward, that was a bit about my roots. Fast forward to some work that I've done since we started this journey of motherhood. This piece, we'd wanted a baby for a while, but when we started trying in 2014, I suffered a miscarriage, and it was a really profound experience for me. It made me question my body, my womanhood, and it really affected me more because I felt so alone. I don't feel like people talk about it as much as it really happens. So this was a piece that was a performance and installation piece that I did. It was inspired by Victorian and Japanese funerary traditions, confessionals, sweat lodges, the Virgin Mary. So I'm just going to give you a basics of what I did. It basically have these a veil of black origami chrysanthemums, and then black charcoal on my hands. And I walked through the gallery with that on during the opening, and then entered this structure that was built in the way that sweat lodges are, out of sort of a pliable, sometimes willow, but this is bamboo. And I was thinking about confessionals too. And the structure is made of origami chrysanthemums. And then around it, let me see if I can advance it, there's these mounds of salt, which is a purifying element, which is supposed to ward so that the spirits of the dead don't follow you around. And so I entered this structure. I folded one chrysanthemum for every week that my baby was in my womb, and let the charcoal smudge off onto that paper, let them fall to the ground, and then exited the structure, took the veil off. So that was my kind of piece to think about that experience and how that affected me, and allow myself to let it go, really. Luckily, we were lucky enough to get pregnant the following year, but I also decided to apply to a bunch of things that year, well, happily enough. So I was selected to do my first public art project while I was pregnant. It was a temporary public art project where I was asked to co-create a piece with the Austin community. So what I did, I asked all of the participants. I worked with community centers, neighborhood associations, et cetera, and I did these little workshops where I asked people to write their wish on origami paper, and then we folded them together. I taught them how to into these sort of little lanterns, making those wishes, in essence, tangible. And then I strung about 3,000 of them, together, and put them on this bridge that was in the heart of that community, in a park, invited the community to come and do a kind of a walking meditation with me about their dreams and wishes. And we walked across that bridge and lit the bridge together. So it was kind of this big collective wish of that community. And it was important for me because it was my first large-scale work that was funded, and it was my first time that I was really dealing with the challenges of pregnancy physically, and then completing it with motherhood and juggling, like how do I care for this little thing, and I didn't have the energy that I usually do when I do have deadlines, 10-hour studio day, 10 to 16-hour studio days. Couldn't do that anymore. So it was a big awakening for me, this project, about what the demands of motherhood was, and I really had no idea. This next slide, I'm sorry, it's missing an image. It was a picture of my baby in the studio. This is the last project I'm going to share today. It's my most recent project, and it was a ceramic piece. Yay! That it was an installation that it was composed of 1,800 slip cast Lucky Cats, and it was a City of Austin temporary public art project. And this is kind of, I wanted to include that. This is just like a installation shot here, but you can see all the diaper boxes that I used to bring the cats in. And that was the way that I kind of laid out the format for this larger sculptural installation. And it was significant for me because the concept, most of my work before had been very personal, very intimate, and this one was addressing a larger social issue. I was trying to raise awareness for the largest no-kill shelter in the nation in Austin. I was trying to fundraise for it, so each of those cats was up for adoption, and you could purchase it, and all that money would go directly to the shelter to help with their neediest animals, marketing them to get adopted. So I feel like as an artist right now, I feel like this really big obligation to do things that are bigger and address larger issues. And I think this is a trajectory that I'll continue to go on because of my concern for my children's future and what's going on in the world. I mean, it's so huge, right? And I don't feel, it can be really easy to feel really helpless, but at least I can do something. So here's, use my voice in a way. Here's just a few more details. And I think that is what I hope to continue to do with my work, and that's the end of me. Thank you very much.
So we're just going to stop for a minute. It was an older slide presentation, so Truco Nomura really rolled with the punches here. Or maybe we'll just continue with this one till they get the new one. We'll just continue. Yeah, I think so. Okay. So the next artist I'd like to introduce is Janine Hill, and she will be talking about her work in the intersection with motherhood.
How are y'all doing? Good? So I'm working with my laptop and this, so hopefully I won't muff it up too bad. So wish me luck. So usually the way that I like to start this, and I'm a new mom, first and foremost. My daughter's 8 months old. She's amazing, but I'm partial. So the way that I'm going to do this is sort of talk about where I come from and the work that I made pre-baby, and then sort of how motherhood has affected who I am as a human being and who I am as a maker. So without further ado, put this over here. So when I think about motherhood and when I think about starting a family, the place that I usually start is with my parents, my own parents, and where I come from. So these are images of my folks. So my father's a Black Puerto Rican, and my mom's from Poland. And this has had a huge effect on who I am as a human being and the work that I make. And it has really fueled my desire to become a maker and my desire to become a mother. So I was born in the late 70s, and I was raised in the 80s and 90s. And this was a time when the integration of races wasn't necessarily popular, and it certainly wasn't accepted. And so the vast majority of my young life was spent traveling from place to place, trying to find a place where you could raise 4 multiracial children. And so, like Sarah spoke, I was born out west. I was born in Alcalde, New Mexico, on a Pueblo reservation, and from there we moved all over the west and into New York. But eventually we settled in Vermont, hoping that perhaps we could find a place that was liberal enough to raise, myself and my siblings. And this turned out not to be the case. It turned out to be a fairly aggressive place in regards to interracial marriages and children from, that possess multiracial heritage. And so I feel like because of this, I existed on the periphery of things, right? So like, you're not full-blooded Puerto Rican, you're not full-blooded African American, you're not Polish, and so you're all of these things. And I feel like in the world, there isn't necessarily space for that. I think we're moving towards that, but I think we're not yet there yet, and we certainly weren't there when I was growing up. And so this sort of existing outside of multiple worlds caused me to look for a home in alternate places, and that ended up being, sorry guys, I'm forwarding it on my computer, but not on my thing here. So this caused me to find a home in the arts. And so that's the first place where I really found a connection with who I am as a human being, and it was a place that held all of the multiplicity that I am, right? So I could be Black, and I could be Puerto Rican, and I could be Polish, and I could make work that talked about that. And so this constant transitioning in my life of moving from place to place, I think I've lived in 32 different places. And so by the time I was 18, I lived in 22 different places. And so this constant moving meant that landscape meant a lot to me, and that was sort of a fixed point of influence in regards to my own work. So I was constantly looking back to the presence of landscape in my life and the geography of the landscape of where I was living. And so I started working with multiple materials, clay, mostly porcelain, doing some metal work, and thinking about how can I bring together this culmination of who I am as a maker. And so most of these works start out as singular objects, but I'm terribly uncomfortable with the making of just one thing. And so I create one thing, and then I create another thing, and then find out how can I put these multiple things together to create a relationship that's dynamic, at least for me as the maker, and hopefully for the viewer. And so I'm not really comfortable with the pedestal. I wanted to make these pieces that went past just putting them on the pedestal. So I wanted to give them an environment to exist in the world. So I started fabricating a lot of these metal, I consider them like architecture for the pieces themselves, and it hopefully created an environment with which the work can exist. And so I feel like when I look back on this work, I was really starting to work out this multiplicity, this diversity that exists within my own life. And then really, once again, continuing to look at this idea of landscape and what landscape means, not just on an artistic level and a human level, but as a cultural level. Like, what's the landscape of the culture that we're living in? So most of these works are created, and all of these, I'll go back, all of these are about this large, and I work with a cone 6 porcelain paper clay, and they're all made via coils. And so often these works will take 6 to 8 weeks to build, because often the forms that I'm asking the porcelain to take, porcelain doesn't want to take, right? It's like, no, I don't want to do that. And you're like, but I really want you to do that. And so it requires a certain amount of patience and dedication. And I think I like really arduous, tedious things that require a vast amount of thought, and it's sort of like anal retention. And I think that there's a safety in that for me, and I think a lot of that comes from the constant moving, and there's a sense of solitude that's really rich and kind of beautiful that I find in the making of this work. And so I wanted to somehow try to find a way to explore my sculptural work and my utilitarian work, and I have a really strong drawing practice. And so the last few works that I worked on before my daughter was born was trying to find, oh, this isn't working. Oh, that worked. Is trying to find a way to bring those practices together, because I'm multifaceted. I don't want to be coined just a ceramic artist. Not that there's anything pejorative about that title, but I really enjoy drawing, and I really enjoy working with metal, and I really enjoy quilting and working with fiber. And so trying to find a way to allow myself that sense of freedom. And so these last works that I made before my daughter was born was an exploration of that. But I could spend, 10, 12 hours in the studio, and you don't realize before you have a baby how luxurious that is, right? And there's something really breathtakingly beautiful about finding a home in that place, especially if you exist on the outside, and really seeing that's super important, right? And so I was able to really explore and take a really critical look at the environment that I came from and how that shaped who I am as a human being and where I'm going into the future. And you think oh, I maybe I've figured it out. You haven't, but I was at this point where I was I've started to answer all these questions, and I feel like I'm in a really stable place in my work and perhaps as a human being, and there's less fear and self-doubt and all of these things, and it feels right. And and then this happened, right? And you think oh, you hear these stories about how hard motherhood is, and you're pregnant, and you're I'm gonna rock it. I'm gonna be amazing, and I'm gonna carry my kid in the studio, and I'm gonna make all this work. And then they come into the world, and it just doesn't work out that way, right? You, in your heart, you want it to, but it doesn't work out that way. And, for some people, they're rock stars, and it's amazing. But for me, postpartum depression was a really hard thing. And nobody tells you what you have no idea. You have no idea what's gonna happen. This is what my studio practice looked like before my daughter, right? And this is what my studio practice looks like after my daughter, right? So when I work, there's someone in there with me, and I have to figure out a way oh, if she's gonna be in there and she's sleeping, what can I make in the allotted time? So I teach adjunct, and so my schedule is a little bit more forgiving than for moms who work full time. And so for that, I'm super grateful. But a lot of the time, my studio's my kitchen table. And I listen to this really amazing, if you know what On Being is with Krista Tippett, you should. If you don't, you should totally listen because she's amazing. But she interviews Anne Hamilton, and Krista Tippett asks her what motherhood is like, and she's well, it's just a way of accommodating your life. And so if you have to make work at the kitchen table, then you make work at the kitchen table. And so working this way, even though it's completely different and there's a certain sense of anxiety that comes with not being able to dedicate yourself to the amount of time that you're used to making work, there's a really sort of gorgeous trust that I think has started to build in the work. Because if you have 10 minutes to make work, then you have 10 minutes to make work. And if you have 2 hours to make work, then you have 2 hours to make work. And what can you make in that allotted time that you can have a continuous thread of thought, right? So you're not getting totally sidetracked. And so I'm a huge advocate for paper clay because it's amazing. So I've started working with a porcelain paper clay, and if it dries out, then it dries out, and I can attach to it, even if it's bone dry, and I can attach to it after it's bisque fired. And so it allows me a great deal of freedom to work within the confines that I have in my life. And so right now I'm working towards a solo show. It's almost 1,900 square feet, and I'm terrified, but it'll be amazing, right? It'll be amazing. And so all the work that I've made since my daughter was born is the work that will be in the show. And I don't have images to show you. However, these are some of the drawings in clay that I've been working on since she was born. And I'm really lucky. My husband's a maker, and he's super supportive of, like, if I need to be in the studio for 4 hours on a Sunday, he's with my daughter, and he understands. And when my mom comes to visit, she helps glaze in the studio. And so I'm super grateful. And, I think about, this is my sweetheart. Oh, she's so awesome. I know, she's so cute. So, when I think about what I want to pass down to her and my role as a mother, I'm going to go back to what Taruko said. I think something really pivotal happens. At least it's happened for me in becoming a mom. I want to somehow use my need to make work and my need to help build a really sort of beautiful and welcoming and diverse community I need to find a way for that to come together and coalesce. And so I think that that's something that I'm going to focus on for the next however long. So that's what I have. Thanks so much.
We're going to quickly switch presentations for a minute, and then we'll have Iva Quang present. And hello, everyone. Not awkward at all. Let's see. Here we go. Perfect. Here's this. Okay, without further ado.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Taruko and Jeannine. I guess I'm the old mom here. My daughter's 32 and my son's 30. I don't know how we survived it, but we did, I guess, when I'm thinking back, when I was pregnant, we're chatting with some fellow classmates or ex-classmates, and one of my friends said, "Oh my God, Eva, didn't you think about your career first before you got pregnant?" And I was thinking, oh, well, no. I think if I had thought too hard about it, I probably wouldn't. I mean, I did wait, my husband and I were married 8 years before we had kids. We decided that we wanted to wait until we're a little older, until we did a few more things before we would have children. But what I do and who I am, of course, is defined by all that, and probably more than anything else. I'm a female, I'm Asian American, I was born in Hong Kong, I'm raised Chinese, English is my second language, and art is my third language. Like many people, we all have multiple roles. I'm a daughter, I'm a granddaughter, I'm a mother. I'm not a grandmother yet. I'm a student and a teacher, I'm a mentee and mentor, and I'm also a wife and mother. But probably nothing changed my life as dramatically as when I got pregnant. Probably the single most thing that changed my life. Because, not just your whole physical body changes, but I think it's sort of your mentality changes, what you think about. Because I no longer is just only responsible for myself, I have to be totally responsible for this another being, for all his or her needs. So I'll kind of go through some of my work. I think all my work is impacted by all this, and now also in hindsight, as I'm older, I look back and I can see where all the threads are, more so. I always like to show this piece, but it's actually not, it's called the 1,000 Shell Project, 1,000 Shells. And it's actually a project for my art history class. And it goes, and I think it expresses my idea of one of many and many of one. I come from a large family. I grew up in dense cities, and I always think of myself as a small part in a very large world. I have very extensive family members, and so you see that in my work, I think throughout the decades, that we all share a common ancestry. We share a lot of common genetics, but yet it's expressed differently. You know, some of us has bigger noses, some of us smaller noses, some of us are taller, some of us shorter. So in my work, I always try to make each part unique, and I have always done things that have many multiple parts, like the 1,000 shell. But that yet at the same time, I want each part to be different, just like we are all different in this room. You know, we all have slightly different noses, but we share a lot amongst us. So patchwork is another piece that's sort of like a woman that's covered with patchwork clothing. And each design is unique, so there was no two repeating pattern. And in the 80s, that's when my children were born. But starting in 1980, I started thinking about it, like because when I was, I guess, 21, I decided, well, I think I'll have a kid when I'm 30. You know, when you're 20 or 21, that seemed like eons away, right? Then all of a sudden I'm 30, it's like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So then I started thinking about, you know, how we come into being and how we're made out of aspects of our father's side of the family and aspects of our mother's side of the family. And it's like in this fertile garden, and so all the parts are kind of based on body parts. They're kind of, you can see they're kind of rather large. The tallest one is my height. And these are all coil built and working with the local clay and the colors of the wood firing. So I am the egg, I'm the moon. We all came from an egg, and as females, we're also egg producers. I never thought about that when I was younger until, of course, as I'm older. So I'll kind of go through some of these. These are all from the fertility series. So much of my work is based on parts of our body, what's also within our body, things that we can see, and also things that we cannot see. When I started making this one after my daughter was born. Actually, this was both my son too. And I realized that the whole orientation, their orientation to the world is so very different than our orientation to the world. Our orientation to the world is vertical. Theirs are horizontal, you know. And my daughter in particular liked to use her feet, you know, like she wants to touch you, she'll put her feet over and go like this, you know. Like, hold me, you know. And then I realized this gesture, these two-legged things, I start making these, is that we all want to reach out to other people. We all want to make friends. We all want to reach out to our family, and in return, we also want them to reach out to us. So these are kind of how these two-legged pieces start coming. And also the two-part things, how the different parts of us, like, you know, I inherit things from my father's side, I inherit things from my mother's side. So this one's called passion fruit. Let's see, can I go back?
Yes.
Okay. Linea nigra and is based on the line that shows up suddenly when you're pregnant. You know, one day I woke up and there's this black line, and my first thought was like, somebody drew a line on me, you know, and then I realized, that's not possible. You know, my late husband was Kirk Mangus. He does not draw straight lines. He does not like to draw straight lines. I say, right, yeah, Nikki knows, right? So I thought, what is this? You know, and I try to wash it away and scrub it off, and it won't come off. So then I was frantic, like, oh God, I've got some strange disease now, you know. But, you know, then I realized when I asked my doctor, he said, oh, it's a common thing, don't worry about it. I said, well, if it's so common, why isn't it in the books? I tried to read every book about pregnancy that I could find, and there was no mention of that. So this was a sculpture that's based on that, although I changed it instead of a black line to a blue line. So I'll just kind of go through some of these very quickly. This one is called Generations, and I was looking at having dinner with my grandmother, my mother, myself, and my daughter, and we have 4 generations of women at the table. We don't look alike at all. You know, if we walk down the street, you might not think we're related, but we are. You know, my mother's an only child. My daughter's my only daughter. And that got me thinking about how things are passed down from one generation to the next. So that's why as the patterns and colors change as you go around the loop and it comes back. Okay. So all these installations I've done, they all are different each time. Although they might look very similar, I make new, each part is unique, so there's no part, they look similar, but they're not identical. I make either hand build them or throw them. I don't like to cast them because I don't want them to be the same. They're painted in different color combinations and patterns. And also each time it's a new grouping. I make new parts to mix with the old parts. So it's a new mixture, a new grouping, and a new installation. And in response to the time and place, okay. So let's see, am I running out of time? Okay, so let me just go, so Psycho, and let me go to the end one. So I started this series called Oval, based on the egg, because I realized, well, we all come from an egg, but we don't know who we would become and what will grow out of it. Thank you.
All right, everyone. I'll go pretty fast so we have plenty of time for questions. My name is Sarah Parente Ramos, and I'm going to start with an overview of my work and how it intersects with my conceptual framework, process, and career. So in my work, I attempt to give form and emotion to the intangible. I'm interested in the unseen forces that guide human behavior, whether it's the macroscopic world or how empires kind of coalesce. My process involves making hundreds of little pieces that I then combined in ways that speak both to being interesting in the small and in the larger conglomeration. I very much like the physical deterioration of objects. I see a direct allegorical relationships between these scaffolded scenarios and the invisible scaffolding of society. Most of the work that I'm showing right now comes out of this idea of falling as the embodiment of risk. I had a residency after grad school, thanks to my grad school, and I was able to really immerse myself in all these little bits and parts of Paris, of the architecture of Paris, France, and also all these vestigial kind of pieces. I love that like structure, holding up that other old structure, and I thought a lot about how the term falling pervades our cultures. Sinners fall from grace, politicians fall from favor. And so I started thinking a lot about the fluctuations of empires. This work is newer work since I had a child, and it has to do with the microbiome, so all the bacteria that's in our gut. And I started reading about it after, I started breastfeeding, and so it was interesting to me in how the mundane kind of translated into the content of my work. The microbiome has been linked to everything, like how we are in the world in terms of mental health, physical functioning, and I found that idea really compelling, how this little world is controlling our behaviors. So 2 years ago, I finished up a 2-year visiting professor of art at St. Edward's University position, and I moved to a studio in San Diego where I had social support and also teaching opportunities. I now have a 17-month-old, and I've been reflecting a lot on the challenges, benefits, all that stuff that has gone on in that transition, and it's also what encouraged me to put this panel together. I wanted to just highlight a couple things. I noticed a shift in time, what it means to be productive, not defined necessarily by going into the studio every day, because there wasn't a lot of time. Time became kind of more precious, and my pace shifted. In terms of a process, I'd never really reflected on how much intricate, time-intensive processes were essential to my work, and I reveled in them. And so that was a great, having a child was kind of a great kind of wake-up call to be reflective on my process in a different way. I had to be kind of more strategic about what I'm making. Some of the things, I would echo what Janine said earlier. Prior to having a child, a lot of kind of organic work that made, working every day, so things that iteratively just developed out of working every day. So no preconceived, definition of where I'm going, things kind of amassed themselves. And this was something that, it was a very weird shift to move away from that and really to think about maybe what I wanted, how I wanted to get to the end and what the end was, if not in specifics, in kind of like general, maybe emotive terms. The accumulation actually kind of played to my benefit because you can make work everywhere, I found out, including the bathroom. And there's all kinds of scatological humor, we could go there. But, and then, so making elements in different places. And the only thing that I really realized I had to protect or make time for was time to actually think and have the meandering that goes along with that. So I've been doing more tapestries in clay because I can move those around and make them in segments. I've been doing lots and lots and lots of drawings, which I never do, or never had done. I've been doing laser cutting and 3D printing. And my content has changed. I talked about the mundane kind of aspects of breastfeeding and looking into that in terms of an area for research and how that led to my fascination with the microscopical world, and how the research on it has been both magical and hyperbolic. The world has become much richer and more terrifying simultaneously. I've also done more socially engaged work, so this is a collaborative piece I did with community members, but it was focusing again on the microbiome. And then this panel, thinking how I can really use what I'm going through now to assist other individuals going through this, and also enlarge the artistic discussions going on surrounding women in the arts and maybe destigmatizing motherhood. The last thing I'd end with is dealing with the social cultural implications of guilt. Yep, I agree. And figuring out, having determined that for myself, and everybody will be different, how I divide child artwork teaching. Because how much time, for instance, I'm going to have a residency at Joshua Tree, how much time I'm away, and what I'm okay with, and what maybe I just think I should be okay with. I'm actually strangely okay being away from my kid for large, maybe that sounds strange. So really kind of talking to other mothers and figuring out how individual it is. And support, I think, is something that we don't talk about enough, and discussions of paid parental leave. So I was lucky to have these two really supportive mothers, my mother and my mother-in-law. And I also had a paid, in California, there's paid parental leave. And I've been really involved in advocacy for it, because I think the discussion is constrained, the artist-mother discussion is constrained by the larger social context that we live in, and that everybody doesn't have that opportunity to take time. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, I mentioned how 22% of men do housework, while 50% of women do. And even though I have a very supportive husband and we have these discussions, we still encountered that we had to challenge our own preconceived ideas of division of labor and how this thing would play out, his career, my career. And so having those ongoing discussions, and we consider ourselves pretty, versed in feminist discussions, so this was a little bit of a shock to us. My husband is also Mexican-American. We're raising our son bilingual, and so thoughts about where a career takes you and the environments you are in and you want to expose your kids to. So while the intersection of my work and process has been positive in many ways, I think it's important to acknowledge the larger social constructs, and that's why I show these are certain articles that have come out recently that I think I'll have a reference to, a page that has all these useful articles and different resources at the end. So now, without taking too much longer, I want to shift to the panel discussion. So I have some pre-formulated questions, but because we're tight on time, I would like to actually skip those and maybe get them in if we need to, but and really open it up to you guys. At whatever stage and wherever you are, I might ask that I'm going to repeat your question if it's not heard, and I don't think we don't have no mic, right? Or do we have a mic? Oh, sweet. So the mic's right here. So if you, get up there and ask a question, and please do. Yeah. So I'll open up to the floor. Thank you for being the first one.
How do you, ooh, it's loud, sorry.
Yeah, nice, yeah.
How do you each deal with the guilt of being away from your child while you're making art?
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. That works? Yeah. I don't know about the rest of you. I don't feel guilty when I get, well, because I spend so much time with her, and I know that when I'm with her, I'm with her. And I strive to be a really dedicated parent, where I'm not like on my phone and I'm not, strolling the internet, and I'm really present for her. And I feel like for her to see her mom be active with her own passions, I think that's super important, and I think that that's something that I want to instill in her from young. So I don't struggle with guilt in any way.
What do you think? Do you want to jump in? Yeah.
I actually struggle with guilt on the other end, like feeling guilty that I'm not doing enough art, or dedicating enough time to my work. And so, because I have the luxury of being able to be with the baby a lot, but I think that is where I'm at right now, is just kind of getting to that balance. And it's always this kind of pendulum, I feel like, that is helpful with deadlines, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
Eva, did you mind?
Yeah, it's a constant struggle, because on one hand, you want to spend all your time with the baby, but on the other hand, you also miss having to do with be in the studio. I spend, when my kids were very young, I spent most of the time with them. I did not have very many babysitters. It was very seldom. But I wanted, I have to remind myself, I wanted to do this, and I wanted to spend as much time as I could when they were younger. So I knew I think it also helped having a couple of friends who were ahead of me, for example, Andrea Gill, because then there's light at the end of the tunnel, yes. Like right now, I've got to spend 24/7 with them. But then once they get to school, and once they get older, it's different, Then after a while, I realized, like, my daughter keeps wanting me to go away. Bye, Mom, like, don't you have some place to go, So it's a different dynamic, and so it's also very short-lived. And remembering that it's short-lived and it's going to change, I think really helped me kind of do that.
Yeah, I just add the marathon, not the sprint. Depending on how you want to work, maybe you want to sprint, I don't know. But I'd also add, and this tied into one of the questions, and I'll jump in and I guess ask a question about division of labor, because I feel like having family support can be really key in helping deal with kind of guilt, or whether you have guilt at all, and how you deal with that. So how have you guys kind of negotiated the division of labor with both kind of mundane stuff and career-wise? Yeah.
Is this still on? It is still on. Okay. I feel like, I don't know if it's, I don't want to generalize, but I do feel as though that from my friends who are mothers, who are in relationships with other men, that more often than not, the females end up doing most of the housework, which is frustrating in a lot of ways. And I have a great husband, and he does, as much as he possibly can. But in my personal life, my husband's also a maker, and so I think it's just like a constant, like in any relationship, you have to have a conversation about the equality that exists, whether you have a child or not, and that, I think that can be said in regards to the housework that has to get done and who's going to have a show. So like my husband had a solo show in the fall, and I'm having one now, and so we're just trying to constantly give each other the room and the freedom to, explore opportunities. And I think that if you have that conversation and you're like really talking and you're really open, that like helps things a lot.
I would say, yeah, it's a constant, because you have to debate about it on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
Sometimes, but the times that also you can negotiate, okay, if I do this, would you do that?
Right.
It's
a constant negotiation.
Right.
Yeah.
I did this yesterday. Go ahead, there's questions.
Yeah. I don't know how many of you have had home studios or work from your homes. Do you have any specific strategies that have been very helpful in getting you to do your work and not get distracted? Those little ones are so distracting. In a good way, you might even, your mind just wanders back to them, or you find things that you think need to be done more than your work. Do you have specific things that work for you?
Great question.
I have, what I found to be the most helpful is I have multiple workstations set up in my studio. So like if I have 3 hours, then I set myself up so that I can use those 3 hours as efficiently as possible. So like I have, before I leave the studio the day before or the week before, I make sure that I set myself up for the next time that I'm gonna go there. And so like if I'm rolling out slabs that day, then I make sure that like the clay that I'm gonna use is by the slab roller. If I'm rolling out coils, I make sure that I have the clay to the consistency that I want. And so I just have all these little stations set up so that I can use that time super efficiently. That's what I do.
I also really trying to get her to be more consistent about bedtime, and then I'm more of a night owl anyway, and luckily my husband can sometimes take that morning shift, so like kind of negotiating that and like using the time when she's just kind of passed out it really is the best thing for
But
me.
then you don't sleep at all.
This
Then
is
you're a
true,
walking zombie.
but I'm good at napping too, so that helps as well.
And I think it does change depending on age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The consistency of mental thought. Yeah, definitely. Let's get into more questions. Yeah.
I just had a question about health concerns with young children. Is that within the practice of ceramics and pottery, there's a lot of dust and chemicals, and so what are some of the concerns that you've faced with having young children around your particular practices?
Yeah.
I changed a lot of my materials. Before I was pregnant, I was using a lot of barium glazes, and they would powder off, and also I can taste it on my tongue, even though I was very careful. So I made a conscious effort to change everything I was doing, because I figure I'm not going to have that many kids, and if I'm going to have one, I'm going to try to make it as healthy as possible,
Mix it up too much.
So I did. I changed my clay body. I changed temperature. Instead of working with glazes, I went to slips because it would not come off. It wouldn't powder off. You paint it on and it sticks on. So I made a lot of different conscious changes to what I did and what materials to use. And I always change my clothes, for example. Because when your kids are little, you can't tell them, like, stop, I gotta go wash up first, don't hug me yet, So I have a set of clean clothes, so before I leave the studio, I change in my clean set of clothes and leave my dirty set of clothes at the studio. Or if I'm gonna bring it home, I bring it home in a bag, so I can take it directly to the washing machine.
Yeah. So, this discussion was in the framework of women also underrepresentation in different fields. So it was particularly geared to mother artists. But Peter Pincus did an excellent interview about having a safe studio for children, because he is also a father, and so I think that's a definite concern. Do you want to? The one other thing I'd say is I do not want my kid, because I use a lot of alternative materials, like area that my son never goes in. It's literally a closet, and I will do things in there that I wouldn't want him having any interaction with. So yeah. Next question. Yeah.
Yeah. I was interested in something Eva brought up earlier, where you're sort of deciding, I'm going to have these children, and so I'm committing to that. And I have 2 young sons myself, and I'm also a full-time professor who should be applying for full professorship sometime soon. Yet my studio practice has slowed down a bit, with my children being young. And I'm really interested in this idea that we're supposed to raise our children as though we don't have a job, and work our job as though we don't have children. Yet it's totally considered inappropriate to address the gap in your resume, in an application for tenure. And it just seems like I feel like I need to explain it. But then if I do explain it, I'm frowned upon for letting my motherhood get in the way of my practice, which it can't help but do that. So I guess I'm interested in your thoughts on that and how you addressed it.
Me? Well, I was an adjunct for most of my life. So although I put in full-time hours, I know there is, I used to joke, every artist needs a wife, in particular female artists. Because, oftentimes, okay, I'll go back. This is something that, the Studio Potter just has out a women's issue. And I forgot how many years ago, it must be maybe 15, 20 years ago, the last issue on women artists. And I was talking with Jerry Williams, who was the editor at that time. So he had an article on the women of ceramics, so I was kind of excited, who's it going to be? Well, it was the wife of Ken Ferguson, the wife of Val Cushing. And I said, well, what's that got to do with women in ceramics? Right? It was very nice that they're such lovely people and so kind to their husband and help their husband out. But I have to say I was really upset, because we expected to have these dual jobs, so many different roles, whereas they're able to do what they do and have a full-time 24-hour supportive person that did everything to help them along, And so
I would jump in and say the statistics bear that out.
Yes,
I mean, that
it
is
still
why
does.
there is, less women representation and less minority. I gave those statistics in the beginning, and it's a legitimate issue. But I think it's reframing, if everybody should have a wife, well, maybe then everybody should be a wife. It's we have to frame that discussion. And perhaps educate. There's slow little increments, but yes. And then there's a definite, I'm dealing with that too of why did you move somewhere? Social support doesn't seem like a legitimate reason. So yeah.
Good afternoon. My practice came to a complete halt after getting pregnant and having my child due to extenuating circumstances. And I'm trying to get back into the field. And I'm wondering if there's somewhere where you can go online for resources or if there are grants or scholarships for moms that previously did art and are trying to do it again.
Yeah. So I'll just jump in there and say I've tried to compile. I reached out to a lot of different artist mothers that I know, and it is on my website because it's easy for me to update. But there's some there. There was a lot of really, in the last 10 years, great resources. And we can talk about different resources that we found or residencies and things, maybe just a one or two each or something, or just shout out to?
There's the Sustainable Arts Foundation they have a specifically parent residency and a parent grant. So I would look that up just to kind of see if it's something that you could apply for, but it's geared specifically toward parent artists.
And the Santa Fe Art Institute has a really amazing family residency. So if your partner is a maker as well, you can go with your partner and your children. And it's a month-long residency, which is really great. And is it Roswell?
Roswell's also family friendly. Yeah, and so a lot of those, I have a link. The Sustainable Arts also has a website with many that are
Which
really
is
great.
really amazing.
Yeah. Eva, do you want to?
I just happened to be very lucky when I had my daughter and also with my son to be invited to two places whose director just had babies too, so they were very sympathetic, because when they called me, I said, well, I just had a baby, I'm still nursing, can I do this, And they said, sure, no problem, I just had a baby too, I'm nursing as I'm talking to you,
Yeah.
So that was kind of a very fortunate situation. But there's other situations that would be totally inappropriate, for example, the Kohler residency, which is fabulous. But it's not a place that you can bring your children, or it's not a place, first of all, they don't allow you one. Number two, I would not like to, even if I could, I would not want to bring my children there either. So you kind of have to negotiate all that kind of on your own, how you feel. Yeah, we'll have another question.
So it's interesting. My child is 16 months, going on 17 months. So I was really connecting with you too, with the age. Anyways, how did you heal your postpartum depression? Is it healable?
Well, I had, and I feel like people don't talk about it, and if they do talk about it, they want to give you medication. And so I was breastfeeding, and so that wasn't something that I was really interested in. And so I had my placenta encapsulated, and that really was amazing. And then you should write this down because it's really helped. Passion flower root, which is a tincture that you can get at Whole Foods, has really helped, and it's really great for nursing mothers. And skullcap, which is also a tincture, and taking the two of those sort of help with the anxiety level, and it's super safe for the baby. So if you're nursing. Yeah. But those two things are amazing. So I take those twice a day.
I'd also just shout out to postpartum depression support groups and any kind of collective groups really help. I'm part of an exercise group, which keeps me fit, artist groups. I think community is hugely important for negotiating whatever you're negotiating. Yeah.
Fellow moms, too.
Fellow moms, reach out, yeah.
Hi, first I wanted to say thank you so much for this panel. I'm a mother and an artist, and I'm a little bit further along in terms of kids' age. They're 6 and 4, so I'm sort of out of that, initial hardship. And I don't really have a question, but I wanted to share sort of another resource.
Great.
And it's actually a project of a contemporary artist living in Pittsburgh, and it's called Residency in Motherhood. And you can look that up. The artist's name is Lenka Clayton, and she's a great friend, but also just created this amazing project that acts as a resource for mothers. So when she became pregnant, she wrote this manifesto that talked a lot about sort of the hardship of mothers. And at the end, I just want to read a little bit of what she wrote. The beginning is just about sort of how difficult it is to navigate the residency world, the professional artist world, and marry that with motherhood. But I just want to read the last part of her manifesto, and it goes, I will undergo this self-imposed artist residency in order to fully experience and explore the fragmented focus, the nap length, studio time, the limited movement, and the resources, and the general upheaval that parenthood brings, and allow it to shape the direction of my work rather than try to work despite it. So she really took a stance to take motherhood as an inspiration rather than something that prevents you from, that prevents you from being more prolific, or, that becomes like an obstacle.
Yeah.
And she created a residency that she just created a framework of a residency, and she just called her own studio time in her own house a residency. So it was this that's why she called it the self-imposed residency. Yeah. But now her kids are a little bit bigger as well, and now she sort of opened up this forum to as a resource for all mothers who are also trying to are artists and trying to have these things work together. So she actually has a mentorship program too, that you can have Skype sessions with her and talk about these things. So I recommend you.
Yeah, I think
checking it out.
I hope it's on my reference list. So I hope, because I've definitely seen it, and I think the issue of we all deal with constraints in some way. We all have limitations that we think is just our artistic practice. Why shouldn't motherhood just be one of those things that gets us creative? So thank you so much for sharing that.
I thought it was just so beautiful that she
Thank
could
you.
reframe it as an inspiration.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Hi. So it's fairly well known that women bear more of the psychological burden in families that have children because of all of the things that they take care of on a regular basis. And with that being said, I have found that it's hard to keep my artistic brain active and to keep a hold of my creativity. It's easily lost dealing with all those things. Do you have any things that you do that help you, or any tips or advice with that?
Strategies, yeah.
I have, so as I mentioned, my husband's a maker, and so what we've done is we give each other prompts.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And so, he'll give me a prompt, and he'll say, okay, and so he'll give me constraints that I have to work within, and then he'll give me a time frame. And so, you have to make this piece in a week and a half, and I found that is super helpful. So, we feed off of each other. So I'll give him one, and I'll see what he produces, and so it's just sort of and I think you could do that even if it wasn't your husband. You could do that with a friend
Or yourself.
Or yourself.
I have a list of cards. It's a strategy where you make a list of cards and you have different prompts on them, and you make them for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so since...
Yeah, I give myself assignments, pretend assignments, or assignments as if I have to get this done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to have to wrap up because I think we've gone way over. I see him standing there, but we're going to be here to answer questions, resources. If you have any resources, please share with me, send me an email, and I'll put them on there because I want this to be useful to people. Thank you so much.
Thank you.